Alright, what's going on everyone? Today we're going to take a look at the Arcane Tempo Challenger deck and see if it's still playable after rotation. And we're not just going to look at the Challenger deck, I'll also go over the other two competitive variants, those being Izzet Phoenix and 8 Drakes. So yeah, we'll cover all of them in this video. But anyway, the short answer to whether this is still playable is yes. Absolutely yes, 100% yes. In fact, not only is it playable, but the Izzet Phoenix variant might actually be more powerful than before rotation. The Arcane Tempo deck lost so few cards, in fact, that I don't even have cool cards to put in the thumbnail. I mean, at least with Lightning Aggro, we lost Goblin Chain Whirler and gained Bone Crusher Giant, so it makes for a great thumbnail. I mean, look at that. Bummer, we lost Goblin Chain Whirler, but ooh, look, Bone Crusher Giant, fancy. I'm gonna have to put like Charter Course or Spell Pierce in the thumbnail for this video because that's basically the extent of what you lost. And that's really good for you, but what about me, huh? What about my poor clickbaity thumbnail? It's a rough life, man. Alright, so I will go over all three decks individually, but first, let's take a look at some of the cards that rotated out of all three decks. One of the major ones is Tormenting Voice, and this is basically irreplaceable in the Phoenix deck. Being able to draw 2 cards and discard Phoenixes is just too good, and the deck is basically completely unplayable without it. So, you would think that the deck is doomed, right? Except now we have Thrill of Possibility, which does the exact same thing, and also does it at instant speed. So it's strictly better. Granted, 90% of the time, you want to cast Tormenting Voice in your first main phase, so you can discard Phoenix and then bring it back into play. But I mean, you have the option now. You can cast it at instant speed if that's necessary, where you didn't have that option before, so yeah, it's better. The deck's also lost Charter Course, and this one is a little bit more complicated because the best replacement varies deck by deck. So for the stock Arcane Tempo deck, Winged Words might be fine, but that's not as good in Phoenix because the discard option was necessary. So in that deck you might want Merchant of the Veil or the Royal Scions. Those will probably work better, and we'll go more in depth into this when we go over the individual decks. But yeah, this one's a little bit more complicated, but we do have, reasonable replacements for this. It's not that devastating. The deck's also lost Spell Pierce and Dive Down. These were great because you could protect your creatures for a single mana. We don't actually have perfect replacements for these, and the ones that we do have are kind of worse. We can play Negate in favor of Spell Pierce, which is 1 mana more. It is more reliable, but the point was to have a 1 mana counterspell, even if it was a little bit worse than Negate. And for Dive Down, we have Lazotep Plating, which is fine. It's slower, it costs 2 instead of 1. It's okay. It's a downgrade, I think, but it does put out a token, so there's that. But still, you wanted the 1 mana counter for something that's targeting your creature. So yeah, these are a little bit worse, but yeah, no, it's kind of okay. The bigger one is Lightning Strike, and oh man, Lightning Strike, how can we ever replace you? We just can't. Most red decks are replacing it with Slaying Fire, but I don't know if that works for us because we don't really want a 3 mana spell in this deck. Chandra's Pyro Helix might be the best option right now, and also Bone Crusher Giant because that does count as a spell when you cast the adventure, but it won't count as a spell in the graveyard, so it does make the Drakes much worse. So it's, these are imperfect, but they do work as a replacement for now, and maybe we'll get something better in upcoming sets. Anyway, on the flip side, we also have new toys to play with, something that the other decks can't really say. We have things like Improbable Alliance and Iron Crag Pyromancer. Both of these give you a new win condition based on drawing cards. The Alliance pumps out tokens, and the Pyromancer hurls fireballs at anything you want to set on fire, so yeah, those are pretty cool. There's also the Royal Scions, which gives you a continuous draw and discard option, which is pretty fantastic. So yeah, there's some pretty cool stuff. Alright, so let's look at the actual list. This is the Arcane Tempo deck before rotation. This is the exact list that you got out of the box, and if we highlight the cards you lost in red, this is what we're looking at. This is definitely more red than I'd like, but it's actually not too terrible. First off, in this deck, I think you can replace Charter Course with a combination of Winged Words and Thrill of Possibility. Winged Words is pretty good, but you can't discard Phoenix to it, and it's kind of clunky if you don't have a flyer because you do have to pay 3 mana for it. So splitting it in 2, getting 2 Winged Words and 2 Thrill of Possibility. That works pretty well, I think. The 2 dive downs can definitely be replaced by Lazotep Plating. It basically does the same thing for 1 more mana, and it has the added benefit of spitting out a zombie token. It just is, you know, it's slower, it's clunkier, it costs 2 instead of 1, and these decks do want to cast a bunch of spells, so it's not perfect, but it works. And then there's Blink of an Eye and Mirari Conjecture, and these weren't really supposed to be in the decks at all. They're not really played in competitive decks. The Conjecture would be a sideboard card from time to time, but rarely if ever mainboard. And yeah, these can be converted into more draw spells like Winged Words or Thrill of Possibility. You can also convert these to Chandra's Pyro Helix for more control, and since Mirari's Conjecture is sort of a win condition of sorts, you could replace it with Improbable Alliance, Ironcrag Pyromancer, or Saheeli, all of which give you extra ways to win games, so all of these are fine in that one Mirari Conjecture spot. We did technically lose Sulphur Falls as well, and the best you can do for this is replace them with Steam Vents if you have them. I know they're expensive, but this is our best option at the moment. I don't think I want to play Temples in this spot since we already have too many tap lands as is, though you can replace the Guild Gates in the deck with the Temples. Scrying in this type of deck is pretty important, so yeah, I think that's fine. But replacing Sulphur Falls with Temples means you'll have 7 lands total that enter the battlefield tapped, which is nearly a third of the mana base, and I feel like that's just too much. Too much of the mana base is coming into play tapped if you have Guild Gates and Temples. So this is a quick deck list I cobbled together to give you an idea of what this deck could look like. Please note that this is completely untested and unrefined. I'm not pitching this as the exactly perfect deck list. I'm not saying you need to copy and paste this and, you know, buy these exact cards. I'm just saying this is what it can look like, and the point is, you know, it's kind of fine. The deck is still looking pretty good after rotation. So let's move to the 8 Drakes deck, and this one is a bit tougher because we did lose one of the key pieces, that being Enigma Drake. So it's not really an 8 Drakes deck anymore because well, there's not 8 Drakes, there's only 4. So this is a competitive Drakes list. This deck was played at Pro Tour Cleveland, and this is the most recent publicized competitive list. And here are the cards that lost. Once again, there's not much here except for that Enigma Drake. That's a rough one, but most of the rest is, you know, fairly easily replaceable. So one possible replacement for that Enigma Drake is Invade the City. It puts a zombie army token into play that's the same size as the number of spells in your graveyard, but the problem is it's super clunky. The benefit of Enigma Drake is you can still play it on turn 3 even if it has 0 power because it'll grow over time, but that is not true for Invade the City. You really don't want to play it in the early game. It's only good really late into the game, so it's not the type of card that I want 4 copies of. You can probably take 1 or 2 Drakes out for 1 or 2 Invade the Cities and that'll be fine, but I wouldn't want to replace all 4 copies with this. However, once again, we do have Ironcrag Pyromancer and Improbable Alliance, which are definitely possible replacements. And I've also seen people playing with the Alliance, the Pyromancer, and Fairy Vandal. This package is all about drawing, and when combined with Crackling Drake and a whole bunch of card draw spells, you basically try to win by just drawing cards constantly. So yeah, that's a possibility, something to consider. It's kind of a different deck entirely, but also it's got lots of overlap. You already have most of the cards, so that's also a thing. And then also in this deck, I think Winged Words is a fine replacement for Chartercourse. We don't need to discard Arclight Phoenix, and also Terramander gives us a much better chance of having a flyer in the early game. So Winged Words is pretty good, but if you are worried that you won't have Terramander, you can split these up. You can do like 2 Winged Words and then 2 Thrill of Possibilities or 2 Merchant of the Veil, something like that would be fine. And then there's Dive Down and Spell Pierce, and once again, I think the Plating and Negate are just the best options. So yeah, that's that. That's actually the 8 Drakes list. So this is just a quick little list I put together, just replacing stuff. And again, I'm not necessarily pitching this as the best deck, but gives you an idea of what it can look like. And it's mostly the same, just a few minor changes. Now let's move to the Izzet Phoenix deck. So this is the most recent Phoenix deck that performed well at a major tournament. This is from GP Las Vegas, and these are the cards it lost. The creature package is completely untouched, and it's really just a matter of finding replacements for these few spells it lost. Like I said earlier, Tormenting Voice is an easy one. It goes straight into Thrill of Possibility. There's no thought required here. It's the same thing except better. Chartercourse is more difficult in this one because we do need that discard outlet, so it can't go into Winged Words. If you aren't already playing a full playset of Tormenting Voice, then I do think you need to go to 4 copies of Thrill of Possibility, and then the rest can be converted to, I would say, Merchant of the Veil or Royal Scions, both of which give you a discard outlet and both give you a continuous source of drawing and discarding as well, so that's actually kind of great. though the downside is they don't count as spells in your graveyard. But keep in mind, however, that even though the merchant will count as a creature in your graveyard for Crackling Drake, so it makes Crackling Drake slightly worse, it does still count as a spell when you cast the adventure for Arcane Phoenix. So it's basically a mini Faithless Looting in standard, and you do get a creature out of it too eventually, so yeah, it's fine. And then there's Lightning Strike, and of course this one is just basically irreplaceable. Chandra's Pyrohelix works, but it's not great. I don't think it's a great card, but it can fill the slot in the meantime until a better burn spell is printed. I guess you could technically replace it with Bone Crusher Giant as well, but I feel like there is a danger in making Crackling Drake too weak if we keep taking out spells for creatures that have adventures attached to them. But with that said, Bone Crusher Giant is great, so maybe it's worth trying. Even though it makes the Drake a little weaker, it also provides a 4/3 body on the battlefield eventually, so it's actually not bad. It's just, you know, if you keep taking out spells for Bone Crusher Giants and Merchant of the Veils, then you are running the risk of Crackling Drake being just less and less good in general. And then finally, this particular deck was playing Warlord's Fury, and that's mostly because it was a 1-mana spell that could draw a card. I think the best replacement for this is probably Merchant of the Veil again, but yeah, once again, how many spells are we going to take out for creatures? We can't keep doing this, so maybe the best answer is just any spell that draws a card for 1 or 2 mana. As much as I want more Merchant of the Veils, yeah, there is just a risk of having too many creatures. So anyway, at the end of the day, I think these blue-red spells decks are mostly fine. Not only did they not really lose a whole lot, but they actually got some pretty cool new cards to play with, and they're only going to get better as future sets are released. While the other challenger decks were basically rendered nearly unplayable, or at the very least they suffered some losses, the Arcane Tempo deck and its 2 variants are still going strong, and they're only going to get stronger throughout 2020. So yeah, if you bought the Arcane Tempo deck, I absolutely believe you can still play with it. I think it's fine. It needs some small alterations, but I think you can continue to play this thing over the next year, so that's pretty good. Anyway, that's it for me. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope this video was helpful, and I will see you in the next one.